Hey folks, thanks so much for joining us. Really excited to have an incredible colleague of mine who I've worked with a little bit in the past. We put together the Southern Vancouver Island Permablitz Network. That was a huge string of words that we had to say a lot of the time. So we just ended up truncating it to a little acronym, but I'm joined by Tayler Krawczyk of Hatchet and Seed Contracting. Tayler, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Javan. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, great. I know we talk about catching up every once in a while, and this is the next best thing. I've got mate in the cup, and I hear you have a cocktail. So, drunken gardening 101. Let's do it.
Fair enough. I'll have to admit I'm not drunk yet, so it probably won't be quite as interesting as it could. But maybe the next time.
Yeah, maybe a monthly installment of like drunken propagation, where like you, me, and Solera all get like half cut and then propagate in our own separate arenas.
It's true. Well, I have learned probably as much about history from Drunk History, the show, as anything else. So I think maybe for YouTube listeners, that might be an avenue. I don't know.
We might be onto something. So Hatchet and Seed Contracting is one of the most exceptional edible landscaping businesses I've come across. And it's really due to their desire and their real big push to ensure that not only are the landscapes that they build for their clients edible, but beautiful, stunningly beautiful. And I really recommend people check out Hatchet and Seed Contracting. Is it .com or .ca, Tayler?
It's hatchetandseed.ca.
Hatchetandseed.ca.
Although actually I think there's a redirect. Both will get you there, but a Google search is usually the way most people find us.
Awesome. And definitely check out a lot of their landscapes, just beautiful, stunning conversations of what you can do to have grocery store landscapes right in your backyard, but also an incredible amount of beauty. Hatchet and Seed Contracting is not only Tayler, but also his partner, Solera. Solera brings a huge amount of aesthetics, an incredible amount of plant knowledge, and also has a lot of knowledge around fiber shed and dyeing. And I'm sure we could have 4 or 5 conversations just with Solera alone.
Definitely.
And you guys are growing. You've got one employee, Tim, who I ended up being, or was a student of mine years ago, and now you have your second employee. So you must be growing quite well.
Yeah, I mean, this is our big push. We hired Tim last year, part-time, and then he very quickly moved to full-time this year. He speaks very highly of you, by the way, Jeff, as I'm sure you would know. Yeah, Tim's a great fit for the business as well. So he started full-time early this year, and that's great just to have him on. He's got years, and he's actually got 10 years of landscaping experience, so he's really knows the business, and yeah, is very keen to be applying things that he's learned in, Gaia College and permaculture courses, or organic horticulture mixed with then edible training coming through permaculture. He's so stoked to finally be able to have a place where he can apply that on a daily basis. So Tim's a great fit. And then we've also just hired Shanna Beatty, who, she's on 2 days a week right now. We'd love to have her on more, and that's going to be, probably happening in the future, but she's great too. So yeah, it's been a big year as far as managing, crew growth and that, but we're headed the right direction.
Bravo, man. Bravo. So great to see. I remember years ago when we were cohabitating the same house, and the conversation was, how the heck do I find suppliers, and how do I get gravel from column A to column B? And Jason Nyberg and you coming in, and I think it was the story about some kind of bird and colloidal silver that was like 4 or 5. And then at some point there was some really bad rhubarb wine that I think has blocked out certain memories in long term. Like I don't think I remember a lot of my childhood because of that wine, but it was good times starting out.
Well, permaculture is about multifunction, and that particular wine doubled as nail polish remover. So we like to be multifunctional.
It would take away dreams, memories, and heavy duty industrial paint. Fantastic. Yeah. Anyways, one of the reasons I asked Tayler to join me. Sorry, go ahead, Tayler.
It's gotten better over the years.
I'm sure it has. I'm worried. Tayler and I are going to a wedding in September, and I'm sure I'll have to try. I will generously try some again.
I'll bring something back.
Please do. Reason I asked Tayler to jump on the call today is Taylor's been experimenting with wicking beds, and after my conversation with Jeremy Prentice, of Very Edible Gardens, I started to take a look out and put out on social media, and Tayler jumped on in, and we started chatting, and it felt like a really good way to show another way of working with wicking beds, not in Australia, but now we're in Canada, on the western coast of Canada, on Vancouver Island in Victoria, and just showing some of the differences and how they work. So I'll run through some of the similar questions that I did with Jeremy here with Tayler, just to get somebody else's approach, and just to round out the conversation about wicking beds. Because again, I'm still a relative newbie. I've done a little bit of the global buckets, which Taylor's going to talk about a little bit. But just again, Tayler, thanks so much for joining us, and looking forward to chatting. Not looking forward to that rhubarb wine. I tell you, it's long-term memory. It's what is it? We only learn by pain.
Painful, yes.
Yeah. Cool beans. So Tayler, let's start off nice and easy. You know, what's your bumper sticker, or what's the elevator pitch on what a wicking bed is to somebody who knows nothing?
I think for me, a wicking bed is pretty straightforward. It is a container. It's always done in a container essentially, but it would be a container that has a growing medium on the top, and then it has a water reservoir on the bottom. And through design, in some way, there's a wicking component that allows water from the bottom reservoir to get up into the top. I think that's as broad as I would leave it. There's lots of different ways to get that water up top and lots of different design. But I think at a functional level, it's water on the bottom, growing medium on top, and some form of wicking action to get the water from the bottom to the top.
Right. So we're getting down to a real basic definition. It seems like now we've got, you know, two individuals weighing in, a container that holds water in the bottom, some kind of interruption between the water and the growing medium, right?
Yeah, that's about as basic as I would keep it, just because there are so many different variations. And, you know, I mean, we've adapted one particular method, but it's not, you know, like I watched the webinar with Jeremy, and it was fantastic. And I don't think I have a whole lot to add other than just a slightly different version, and it's not better or worse. It's just a slight tweak on the way that the water gets up. So yeah, I think lots of different approaches to get to the same end.
Yeah, and I think that's a great piece to pick up, because when we get to gardening, when we get to growing, when we get to landscapes, I know it's one of the things I always find when I'm taking a look at landscapes or taking a look at the possibilities within a landscape. There's just so many. There are so many ways to slice it, so many ways to cut it. I was speaking with our colleague and friend Gord Baird today, and speaking a little bit about his work with composting toilets. And again, lots of different ways to approach the idea of composting toilets. Of course, here in British Columbia, since 2016, we've got the building code to be able to allow legally composting toilets, gray water systems, and black water systems. So I feel like there's a similarity there, that when we get to gardening, it's really about all the ways that there are and the ways that work for you. And one of the things that Jeremy said, which is shown with your backdrop, well done, is that anything that takes up some of the learning curve or takes up some of the modulation that plants need in terms of their watering or other needs allows us to be, quote unquote, better gardeners, which is really just not allowing so many plants to die.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, for us, that was where this originated. It was part of a project where, you know, the first ones went in a place where, yeah, it was, you know, a place that wasn't going to get irrigation, conventional irrigation. So it was relying on hand watering. And, you know, we knew that this would be a far cry from having to water essentially every day. I mean, here in a container garden in July and August in Victoria, you can count on zero rain. That's how I run my water budgets for this climate. And I say June, July, and August, I account in my water budgets for zero rain, not a single drop, because that's pretty much what we've been getting for the last 5 years. And so with that reality, you need to water a small container or even a large container every 1 or 2 days. And so for those months, this wicking bed, or any wicking bed that functions properly, is going to give you a bit of extra days where plants won't die, which is really what somebody wants, you know, who's just getting started in gardening.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that surprised me most when I moved out to the West Coast. Coming from Alberta, I was expecting that because of the temperate climates, there's going to be a lot of rain, there's going to be an abundance, but that incredible summer drought that's anywhere from my experience of living there 5 years. I think there was close to 90 days without a substantial rain event, which is close to what you were saying. It's remarkable to be in a climate like that, that is very moderate over the year, not a lot of snow, but definitely getting more, it seems, over the years, but having such amount of drought. And so much of what we're talking about, not only in this conversation, but other conversations, is really about resilience and adaptation to be able to hold more water in the soil or in a way that the plants can get at it.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a tough climate to grow in. I mean, shoulder seasons are nice. We get a ton of winter rain, but the way things have gone, there's a great grower nearby, Bob Duncan, who always refers to this as a modified Mediterranean climate. But even he is saying it is increasingly moving towards a true Mediterranean climate, as far as the rainfall pattern is concerned anyway, because we are pretty much reliably getting 3 months with no rain. And the odd time we'll get a 5 mil rain event or something like that, but essentially that's what plants need for 1 day is 5 millimeters. So those even a 3-5 millimeter rain event, that's what plants need for 1 day. None of that actually even gets into the soil. That's just immediately used up. So soil moisture here through the summer is it's nothing without human intervention. And that's obviously why we put in irrigation and or we build a wicking bed.
Yeah, I imagine our Albertan for me and Saskatchewan for you, friends and family, are saying, "Oh, poor you! It's such a hard growing condition to have 6 to 7 to 8 months of growing time." But it's interesting because each place has its own issues and its own problems. And the Okanagan and the Boundary, where I spend half my time, the June soons that come in can wipe out crops quite easily, wipe out garlic crops quite easily. Getting into Alberta, we've got hail, we've got incredible inversions when it comes to the Chinooks, and a really compressed growing season. So it's interesting how there are some larger arcs in terms of Canadian growing that are issue prone, but then when you move down the levels, it really does become site specific.
Yeah, and I grew up on the prairies, as you know, and July hail, that sucks for your tomato crop and anything else. And so at the end of the day, yeah, we have it pretty good here in Victoria. It just comes down to you have to irrigate, and you have to irrigate daily or bi-daily, essentially. Anybody who's farming out here, you have to have your water supply, and everyone's running drip out here. Maybe sprinklers if you can afford the extra water, but irrigation is just such a necessity, and it's not a big deal. Like, we set up drip all the time or wicking beds. It's not a huge issue, but there's a lot of sort of prairie gardeners that are more used to like hand watering as needed, because you get the big summer storms that we'll drop 30 mils in a couple days and recharge the groundwater, and that is just not a reality here. That never happens. So soil moisture levels in the ground just fully deplete. They never get recharged for a huge period of time. And so you just have to play that. You have to just trickle feed everything for that long period of time. And like I say, I mean, if you know that going in, whether it's a wicking bed or whether it's just drip irrigation on timer, it's not a big deal as long as you have the water, which luckily here in Victoria, we have a great reservoir, and as long as you're willing to pay for it, you can do it.
Nice. Is that a car alarm on your side or my side?
I was hoping you wouldn't hear that so loud. It's now gone off, I think. So we live in the city now, as you can hear.
Yeah, that happened to me the other day. I'm on 400 acres in the middle of nowhere, and there was a siren all of a sudden, and it just completely threw me for a loop. So great. So we've got a sense of the climate. We've got a sense of the specific growing conditions. And I think one of the things I learned out on the West Coast was that water close to the ground as much as possible or from the ground up in terms of larger scales, be it hugelkultur or be it, in ground drip, which I saw a lot of on Salt Spring and on Galliano. It just helps because we are losing so much water to evaporation during those 3 summer months. Now, you guys have done something really interesting here with your wicking bed, and I think it's probably a good time to probably throw up the photos and have you talk through them.
Yeah, sure. I can just kind of introduce my approach to, where I came into wicking beds, for sure.
Fantastic. Is that up for you there?
Yeah, I see it. You bet.
Okay, so yeah, just run us through some of the components because there's some interesting things here that I don't think, especially if folks have seen uh, the other film, they're not going to necessarily understand everything that's going on here.
Sure, yeah. So what you're seeing is the guts of the wicking bed that's in behind me. I mean, it's a different one, but same concept. Yeah, while we're on this picture, what you see there is there's an ABS cap in sort of the top of the bin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no, up a little bit where you would put the water in. Yeah, right there.
There we are. Yeah.
That's a distribution pipe. You take that cap off and you pour the water in. What we see as well there are wicking tubes right there, yeah. And that's 4-inch per pipe with little slits cut in it. And it has a sleeve on it. And we just buy the roll with the sleeve, which it often comes with. And at the bottom of that is tied up so that material can't fall into the water reservoir. So those are the tubes that actually bridge the two medium, the top part and the bottom part. And in this particular model, we have 4 of them along the edges.
I'm just going to pull this up on my main screen, and then hopefully I can get us a little bit of drawing because you've got some great details here that I want to see if I can help bring a little bit more. So just going to make this a little bigger. Here we go. So you were just talking about these sleeves, and so these go all the way down, and this is perforated 4-inch Big O.
Yep, Big O pipe, and it comes with the sleeve on it.
Right.
Or the sock, it's sometimes referred to as.
And so the sock comes down, and you've basically tied it at the bottom.
That's right.
And then what have you filled this this pipe with?
So that pipe we filled with just peat moss and a little bit of perlite.
Okay.
So it's inert, meant to be able to sort of handle anaerobic conditions, which it will, to some extent have down in a bucket of water. And yeah, and that's stuffed right up. And then that is, if you can imagine when you dip Jeremy mentioned as well, when you dip a cloth into water, the cloth is the wick and it pulls the water up. So in this case, it's the peat and the perlite that form the wick.
Absolutely. So what you've got is you've got expanded metal lath as the interface between the reservoir and the growing medium. And is it basically at 50%?
It's exactly, 50%, so these particular troughs are 2 feet tall, exactly. And a milk crate is 12 inches tall, so 1 foot. And what you maybe can or can't see in that photo is there's 4 or 5 upside down milk crates that support that metal lath. And we tried a whole bunch of different prototypes, and I'm still not done playing around. But what is not shown in there is we have rock along where the milk crates are not. We've put in small rock, like 1 to 2 inch river rock, to fill up the gaps. And there's a couple prototypes where we didn't put the metal lath in because we nicely graded that area with rocks such that it was already flat. We're still playing around. I mean, this is not the be-all, end-all by any stretch. And what I'll say, having listened to your podcast with Jeremy, is my next iteration of this is to fill the wicking tubes instead of with peat moss with small pea gravel, the same they use in the bottom, and see if we can use a completely inert rock substance as the wick, as opposed to peat moss. We could also put that same medium in along the edges as well, and that may add to the wicking feature as well.
Yeah. Okay. So let's kind of pull this out a bit. So we've got wicking tubes with Big O pipe, 4-inch perforated with a sleeve that are vertically on. Basically, it looks like staggered. So you've got one in one corner, one in the other corner, and then the other ones are, let's say, a third if you're going lengthwise along this, eh?
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah.
Okay. And then you've got 4 upside down milk containers that are basically holding up the expanded metal lath to give you a true open reservoir. So you've got all this space, and I think we worked it out last time, about 320 liters.
Yeah, it depends. Some of these troughs they're between 5 and 8 feet, depending. So yeah, it's around 250 to 350 liters.
Right. And that's probably a good thing to point out. We've got on the length of this, we're at about, I think you were saying, yeah, 4 to 5 feet, or
I
5
think
to
that
6 feet.
particular one's about 6, yeah.
Right. And you were saying that they're not all the same because they come and they're fit together. So it behooves you to take a measuring tape and measure them out and make sure you get the one that's the biggest, right?
That's right. Yeah, we used to, I started by cutting a cardboard template out so that all this could just be really easily systematized. But then I found out that you very rarely get, you'll go in and you'll pay for a 6-inch trough, and it'll either be 5'8", 5'10", 6 feet, 6'2", or 6'4". So the template cutout, we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And then they're about 2 feet wide, you said?
Yeah, that's right. I think they're 22 inches.
22 inches. Okay, so just a little bit narrow. So we've got 5 to 6 feet long, 22 inches wide, and then how tall?
24 inches.
20, so a full 2 feet.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so a full 2 feet tall. Awesome. Cool. So I think we've got the exterior taken care of. Now, one of the things that was interesting to find out is that, one, because it's a galvanized horse trough, it's watertight, waterproof, so you don't have to worry about a liner. And then the second thing that was interesting that you told me is over at the standpipe, there's actually a pre-fitted bung right there.
Yeah, it comes with its own bulkhead fitting ready to screw in. And, you know, a bulkhead fitting is not a big deal to buy and screw on, but, you know, you got to cut the hole and whatever. This thing comes with a prefab bulkhead fitting, and there is a PEX fitting that fits right in there. It's threaded to the same bit and then fits into 3/4 PEX, and then that's the overflow situation that you see there is 3/4 PEX.
Awesome. And then it looks like, are you just using zips, or are you using plumber's clamps around the PEX for?
Yeah, it's PEX clamps, yeah.
It's PEX clamps, okay.
Which, you know, unfortunately requires a $90 tool, but once you have it, PEX is amazing for any sort of. I've even seen people use it for exterior irrigation for certain components, and I kind of like it. But certainly for this, yeah, it makes a great candidate.
Yeah, amazing. What kind of expanded metal lath are we looking at here? Is this 1/4 inch?
It is what I know. Well, the gaps maybe 1/4 inch. It only comes in one size. It's called plaster mesh.
Yep.
And some people call it diamond mesh as well. But it typically comes in 28 inches or so. Yeah, 27 inches by 6 or 8 feet, somewhere in there. Anyway, it fits very nicely with very minimal cutting. So that's another reason why I like that particular material.
And then your inlet, tell me a little bit about your inlet and what we're not seeing underneath the mesh.
Yeah, the inlet is dead simple. So that is a 1.5 inch ABS pipe with a 90-degree elbow on it, and it's got a cap on the top. And that elbow, another reason why I love this, it fits very snugly, and you really got to force it, but it fits into the handle of an upside down milk crate. So I just jam it in there, and then it just sits there, and it's really firm in there. It's not going anywhere. And from there, there's no other pipe, because the whole bottom is reservoir. You don't need to extend that pipe way deep into the bed. It's going to find level. So it's really just that elbow, that 1.5 inch ABS elbow, and a 1.5 inch pipe that is 2 feet tall with the cap. And I choose ABS. It's just a much less toxic material compared to PVC. I really try to avoid PVC at all costs, which this bed has done for us.
Yeah, problematic to always get away from PVC, but when you can, it definitely behooves because of the photo degradation that can happen and then the leaching.
And for me, I mean, like, you know, a lot of water lines come with PVC, and for me, like, I know the health risk is there, but it's more just the way it's made and the way it's disposed of. I just don't like the material.
Yeah,
So
fair
what
enough.
I think is an immediate human health risk or not, I just don't like it.
So what are we looking at for cost? Run me through the bin and some of the other pieces. What are we looking at when you put something like this together?
Yeah, so the bin, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but off the top of my head, I can get pretty close. The cost itself for the trough, a 6-footer, is around $250, and it depends where you get it and where you live, but that's pretty standard around here. The milk crates, you know, you can scrounge and find for nothing, or you can find them for anywhere between $8 and $10 each.
Okay.
So there's 4 of them, $40 at the most. If you're buying them new, which you shouldn't have to. I think I got 25 at a garage sale at a thrift store sale for $1. For $25, I paid 25. So be thrifty, and you can get that way down. What else? The sheet of diamond lath is going to be $14. And like I say, that's sort of questionable as to whether or not you even need it. If you grade up to it with rock, you don't necessarily need that. ABS fittings and the cap, I don't know, less than $20.
And then the PEX is probably not more than that either, probably 20, $25.
Yeah, less, $10 for the PEX. I mean, assuming you have a PEX printer.
Right. So really all said and done here, we're looking at around 334, 335, call it 350.
Well, so what you don't see there is the landscape fabric. We use really heavy duty landscape fabric. That's probably, we run it all the way up the sides as well. I don't know if that might come up in some of the photos, but it doesn't just sit flat. It comes all the way up the sides, and then we kind of fasten it to the top. So it's a full kind of basket.
Yep.
And yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that's probably 30, 20 or $30, $20, something in there.
Okay.
And again, I mean, some of this stuff, like, it's hard to buy small amounts, so we bulk buy and go from there. But anyway, yeah, $20 is a good placeholder. And then there's the big O pipe. So again, we bought a 100-foot roll. You know, to use those 4, you're probably looking at $1 a foot. So you got 4 of them in there at 2 feet or less. You know, probably if you were buying a 100-foot roll, it's probably $10 worth a big O, but you would have to. Otherwise, you're going to spend $100 and have a lot of big O left.
Yeah, fair enough.
And yeah, I think that's it for the main costs, and then obviously just your peat moss, compost that goes inside.
Right. So it feels like it's probably around $400 in terms of all parts in before you look at soil and plants.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Anything else you want to say about this photo?
No, I think we can move on to, I guess, sort of more of what inspired it in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. So tell me a little bit about what we're seeing here.
So yeah, this is, many people might be familiar with this global buckets concept. This was my introduction to wicking beds, and it's a little bit of a different functional mechanism than what Jeremy presented on and their concept in Australia, where there's actually so what you see there is two buckets stacked into one another with the white pipe is a distribution pipe to get water into the bottom. And then there is basically a plastic cup in this case that actually dips down into the water reservoir. And so I've never built one of these before, to be honest. Exactly, we'll see a variation that we did next. But it's this idea that you actually have some medium going down into the water that acts as the wick. And you know, when I saw this originally, my alarm bells went off as far as understanding Elaine Ingham's work and just aerobic conditions versus anaerobic conditions. And it was always really clear to me that as soon as you have material going down into standing water, you need to be a bit careful. And so, you know, I haven't looked at in depth at what most people do for these global buckets, but I would be inclined to put a pretty sterile peat moss into that rather than anything with compost in it. But anyway, like I said, I've never actually built one of these before, but the slide further is sort of what brought me into this.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's something that's really important to key on is that Dr. Elaine Ingham's work in the soil food web, now called Environment Celebration or Celebration Environment. I forget the name of her website. It's a little bit of cognitive dissonance between what she does and the name of it. But one of her big things was understanding that soil is indeed a terrestrial environment and needs to be up to the point of field capacity or a little bit over. But once you go into saturation, going into anaerobic, you start to lose some of those bacteria. And that's a wonderful point that you made there, is that once you start to have that connection mentally, once you have that principle and you see something like this, you're going, wait a second, there's going to be some repercussions if we have this standing here. So that's a really cool piece to bring up, because your inspiration then took you to this prototype with the incredible Jeff Johnson. Tell us a little bit about this work.
Yeah, so this was my first wicking bed that I ever built. And like I say, yeah, I was very much inspired by Jeff Johnson. I think this was his first of this kind as well. He had done some global buckets before, and he was into this butcher shop in Victoria and was talking to them about putting in a rooftop garden. And the next time we went together and we talked to them and so on and so forth, the way we went, they wanted this rooftop garden. And so we went ahead and started designing this system of, it's basically a global bucket, but it is using Rubbermaid totes. And I think what it comes down to for me here is volume. What I didn't like about the global buckets is, you know, you maybe have 2 liters of water in the bottom of that. And that's great. That's 2 liters of water that it can suck up on a couple days when it's really hot. But you're really only getting a day. Like, you're getting 1 extra day where your tomato doesn't die with a global bucket here, maybe 2. Whereas with this system, it was a bit of an upgrade, and then the one we have now is a further upgrade. You know, with this climate, I was really interested in a really big reservoir, something that was, you know, hundreds of liters that you knew was sitting there watering your plants long after you walked away. So anyway, what we have here is, I guess on the right, what you see are these Rubbermaid totes. And we went and bought bulkhead fittings, and we bought little 1-inch nipples that screwed into the bulkhead fittings, such that all of those Rubbermaid totes are connected in series. So it forms one continuous reservoir. And what you don't see is there's a second bucket that then gets set on top. You see that more in the photo on the left. And we had to get creative. You know, anyone who's ever stacked buckets on top of one another and had to get them out of, they get stuck. And so do Rubbermaid bins. So we had to install a little wooden 1x3 or 1x4 piece to keep it at that depth. But in the top bucket that you see in the left photo, there's a small basket. And it's not a cup like you saw in the previous photo. It's more of a little, you know, high density polyethylene basket. And frankly, we went to the dollar store to find it, and it was, you know, not my favorite shopping experience. But we had to find this thing, and it had to have a lip on it that it fit into a hole in the top bucket and could wick it and could, you know, wick down into the bottom one. Anyway, it worked really good, and it probably could go a week or more without watering, because there was dozens of liters of water underneath. But it still did require, you know, people getting up there every 10 days to fill up the reservoir. And yeah, so I mean, it was a success. There's no doubt about it. We grew it really for 2 years. It was an excellent little garden up on the roof there. We grew some interesting crops that wouldn't normally be grown in a wicking bed, which are Mediterranean herbs, because that's what the bakery could use. So rosemary, thyme. And the reason for that is we went with really drought tolerant crops, because we knew that they would not be popped up as often as they should. And yeah, you know, from that experience, there was no issue with it being too wet or anything like that. They seemed to do really well for a couple of years. After that, the staff was not able to get up there uh, every week. There's no access up there, involves climbing on a dumpster, which is not ideal. But anyway, so it kind of faltered for a year, and then it turns out that our employee now, Tim, it's his brother who owns that butcher shop, and he just went back and configured the whole system, and kind of now it's fully running again and looking really good.
Oh, fantastic.
So,
Fantastic. I remember you guys talking about this and having the plans. I think we might have sat down over beers or some kind of rhubarb wine to chat about it one night. And it's great to see so many years later that come around, that a lot of the principles you were speaking about, having a reservoir, having it in series, so you actually have quite a bit of leveling effect, so that way the level of the water would be the same within all the buckets, as true as the roof is. And I've been on a fair number of roofs in Victoria, and I would say very few of them are absolutely flat, but close enough. And yeah, I think this shows a lot of ingenuity of being able to play with the concept.
Yeah, no, it worked well. And Tim, our employee there, he was back to redo it, and he said that, as you know, some of the plants had died after 4 years, but it was just from sheer, they had a total staff turnaround and nobody had watered it, the whole summer. But anyway, he said that he went and kickstarted it again, and that he just added a little bit of organic fertilizer in the beds, but he said the whole thing was working fine. There was no major issues. He didn't take apart anything. He just kind of lopped up the soil a little bit, added some organic sort of Gaia Green fertilizer, and I drove by it the other day. It looks excellent again. So yeah, it's a good system for sure, and I wouldn't knock it at all. It's just that you need to be, like you see, you have on the screen there, it's about a week without water. And I'm talking like July and August when you get no rain and it's like 30 degrees.
Brilliant. Brilliant. No, thanks so much for showing this one. I think this is great to show the progression and where you started with and where you moved to. And I think that takes us to this galvanized horse watering trough, which I think we've explained really well. You've given us a lot of pieces about it. Is there anything specific with this type of design that you find is different in terms of maintenance or in terms of upkeep?
No, I wouldn't say so. You know, you got to put your Teflon tape in on the bottom when you screw in your fitting there, just to make it. You know, it's always nerve-wracking when you have this big thing of volume and then you got a drain hole drilled through the bottom. So you just make sure that connection at the bottom is really good. We put one up at a local restaurant, Charlotte and the Quail. It's at the Horticulture Center here. We built it last summer, and it was actually this trough in the photo that we brought there. And anyway, they wanted to change the location of it this year. It was out kind of in front of the building, and they wanted to bring it around to where it was more visible. So it had a really good growing year there. Anyway, Tim and I had to move it this spring, which was interesting, and we weren't sure how long it would take. And anyway, it took two of us an hour and a half. And we took it all apart. We, shoveled the soil out, or the potting mix, into a wheelbarrow. We took apart all the components. We took out the rock into buckets. We moved it over and we reset it up. And I got to say, yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it didn't stink. It wasn't anaerobic. It was really easy to move, really modular, simple to put back. So I've really found the maintenance of it to be really easy, and especially in a situation where you might have to move it, which you may not have to. But in this case, everything just sort of folded up like it did the day we delivered it, and we just moved it out front and put it back together in, like I say, 3 hours total. So yeah, that worked out really well. And another thing we found, and I still haven't fully processed this, and I don't even know what plant it was, but there was a root mat that was fully in the water reservoir. And I'm talking like a 1 by 1 foot, like fibrous root mat. And we had all kinds of different things in there, nasturtiums and stuff. But anyway, whatever this plant was not afraid to grow in water and had left a big root mat there, which was probably oxygenating the water, was probably also a sign that there was some oxygen in the water, maybe from the rocks that were in there and bacteria that were living on the rocks. So I'm not really sure what to make of that, but yeah, I kept it. There was this giant, like, water root mat, and it was all just food plants we were growing in there, and we never did figure out which one it was, just because of the way everything came out without us knowing which plant it was. But anyways, yeah, that was a neat experience of moving it.
Brilliant. So one of the things you have here is this next prototype, the evolving. Do you want to talk a little bit about the evolution?
Yeah, I mean, this is the same one, the same bin. I just put evolving in the sense that it is still moving. As far as the next one, I want to put in the small aggregate into the wicking tubes instead of peat moss to see if that makes a difference. But what we're looking at here is just the simple piece of PEX that you can get from any hardware store. That particular piece screws into this particular wicking bed, horse trough bulkhead fitting. So that screws on, and then you put your PEX on there. So what you see there is just the overflow. If you ever need to drain it, that you just bend the overflow over like that. And another thing, when we just had to move it recently, we couldn't drain it right where it was. It was right on a path at a really high profile public, garden. And so there was a really simple, quick PEX connector that went from the outside of that overflow and connected to a hose. So you need to kind of spread a hose, and if you can't drain it right in position, all of this stuff exists to at your local hardware store to just quickly connect to a hose and drain it wherever else you need to drain it. And so yeah, that was an easy thing to do. And part of why I like working with these really simple, easily available components.
Yeah, brilliant. I found that with a lot of compost brewers that I've been building lately, is that if I can think of the fitting exists somewhere in some way, shape, or form. One of the beautiful things about the fittings that come with PEX. This is great. I love this because it also shows that if for some reason you need to drain and get some head height on it, you could take the hose, drop it off a couple of feet below the grade, and then get a little bit of drainage going. So
that's right. And the other thing about here is, I mean, we basically, that's the default winter position here for Victoria. As soon as you hit November in Victoria or anywhere on the West Coast, you do not need a wicking bed. And so it's just a raised bed for winter.
Yeah. And when you need it a lot. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this design on the West Coast is that one of the things that is so pervasive is rot or mold. And working with galvanized steel, none of that is a problem. You're working with completely inert materials that aren't going to decompose, that you don't have to worry about replacing, which is one of the things with building garden beds. I remember on the West Coast is you were always trying to extend the life of the wood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this I see lasting for a very, very long time.
Awesome. I think that's it for those photos. One of the things that you brought up, I'm just going to go back to my notes here, that I thought was pretty interesting, is that you did have clients who used garlic, but they said it was great. Like they drained it and they used it and it was no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's probably not the highest use of a wicking bed, but yeah, they had a really heavy clay soil, and so when we put this in, they sort of just salivated at the thought of some nice fluffy soil. And yeah, they grew garlic in it. I mean, all that it meant was that we just had to make sure that it was drained off before, basically starting in mid-June and kind of now July, that we just drained it so that it could properly, because garlic cures in the soil, essentially, or starts to cure in the soil. And so it has to be, you don't really want much wicking happening in July. So that's really the benefit of having an adjustable spillway and being able to drain it when you don't need it.
Yeah. What one of the things you were saying is that it's tough to get tilth into the soil to get a lot of fertility, and you've done some trials with fertilization. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, we found that definitely, anytime you're growing in a container, this would be true of any container growing, not even just a wicking bed. But, we use Gaia Green 444. That's one of our go-tos, as well as some liquid organic fertilizers. And we have found we got a bit caught this year. We've since corrected it, but we added enough last year you get 1 year out of organic fertilizer, and especially here with the winter, that leaches out. And so we had an issue, early in the spring where we probably didn't put as much fertilizer back into the wicking bed as we would have liked. And so we were kind of relying on the success of last year, but that really, you get, anytime you're growing in a container, you get 1 year and then it's time to redo. So we've since been able to go back and add in some fertilizer. But yeah, I mean, overall, growing in a container, generally speaking, one of the advantages in that container is tilth. You get this nice fluffy medium. It's got usually perlite, vermiculite, compost, and peat moss in it. And so that's usually an advantage. But we have found that even with a winter of pounding rain here in Victoria, it is nice. We're generally a big fan of no-till gardening, but you really do need to either mulch super heavily in the winter, which sometimes we don't because we grow a cover crop of peas or something like that. But we do need to just re-fluff that soil up come spring, because that pounding, even on a container mix, can be enough to kind of, have it congeal. So I think tilth is something that, we're learning a lot, is how important that is to maintain tilth and make sure there's enough air in the soil and that. But containers, by and large, they're the easiest to maintain tilth, which I think is an advantage.
Yeah, brilliant. Those are all really good points to bring in, and the conversation about when you're growing in container, you're taking on a lot of the natural elements that would be feeding and a lot of that fertility, a lot of that nutrition. So you have to take that on as the grower. Really good point. We talked a little bit about water last time, and we talked a little bit about the difference between drip irrigation and wicking bed irrigation. And the numbers we were coming up with was about half. Did you do any more work on that, or?
I did, yeah. I put them in the slide there, okay. And they, there's different ranges for sure, depending on how you irrigate. And I think, some of the different numbers I've found between 20 and 60% water savings. And the reason for that is, it just depends on how conscious you are of soil moisture with drip irrigation and how long you're running. So yeah, this slide you have up here, I didn't spend a lot of time on this, but I just kind of roughed some numbers. So on the left, we're looking at drip irrigation for the same amount of space. We have a 12-foot drip line, 12-inch emitter spacing at 1 gallon per hour. So that's what we use here. So then you have basically 12 gallons per hour. If you were running that system for 2 hours a week, which I'm going to say in Victoria is sort of conservation minded, people in Jordan or Southern California are going to scold me for saying that, because you can irrigate a lot less than that. But for people in Victoria, people here are used to running their systems. Just, 2 hours a week would not be that much at all for a drip system. But we can even do better anyway. So what we get to there is about 378 liters a month in that system. And then with a wicking bed, the bed in front of me here holds between 270 and 300 liters, depending on the ultimate size, and that lasts a month or more. So yeah, you're definitely looking at a savings there. What I would say though is drip irrigation. I love drip irrigation. We install thousands of feet of it every year. Especially if you are doing things like putting in soil moisture monitoring systems, which there are, and you're just putting down what's needed. In some ways, I think you can't get much better than drip irrigation that is actually monitoring what the crop needs. But the reality is most people aren't doing that. They're just putting it on for a certain number of hours a week, and then there's some degree of runoff from that. So a wicking bed, I think, is just sort of the best that you can get, because nothing's lost. It's in a container. It's not going anywhere. So the plants just use it until it's gone, and then you fill it up again. So I think the wicking bed is kind of the gold standard. I think you can be as efficient with drip irrigation, but the reality is most people aren't.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point that we've got drip to lean on, but in some situations, especially for folks that are solely with container gardening, probably they don't even have the opportunity to. So if they are going to play with that, and if they are city dwellers, chances are they're not going to have the amount of attentiveness that maybe other people do. So
That's true. I mean, so many times we see patio gardens with, you know, where the pots are just dripping with water, like just so much overflow. And, you know, like theoretically, you could just give that water just enough water, like you could just feed it just enough that it needs, and there would be no runoff. And then it's, you know, theoretically similar to a wicking bed, but the reality is very few people get that right. There's a lot of runoff from the system.
yeah.
And I mean, this is drip. Like if you compare this to a sprinkler, you know, we're orders of magnitude better off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the last things you talked about was the innovation, and we can see it in your wicking bed behind you. Is it's actually really easy to install a trellis onto this specific type of bin.
Yeah, let's see if I can capture that here.
Yeah, please.
I don't know how well you can see, but I mean, a wood one, you know, there's nothing better than a wooden bed to fasten onto. But what I have here is just, well, you're also seeing a tent foot, which is that would be an aluminum tent pole, unrelated. But what you see here, right in here, so as long as, you know, you can drill through these containers as long as you're not into the water reservoir, where of course it's going to spill out water. But right up in here, we just drill through and put in a 4-inch lag bolt, and then a wing nut on the inside of the bed right in here. Big washer. This is a beautiful 2x3 fir, locally milled. I love that dimension. Anyway, and then at the top, I don't know if you can see, but we just have a kind of a hazelnut piece of branch, and that kind of keeps it tied to itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just have this recycled fish netting that we're using as a trellis. But yeah, so there's really only 2 fastening points to that bed, and it basically creates a foundation to build off of. And we've done, a small, I wouldn't really call it a fence, but we've built kind of multi-paneled privacy screens without putting a post in the ground, where we're just using this as a foundation. So yeah, they can be pretty versatile that way as well.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Very easy to do. It's really just one bolt on either side, and because of the tightness and because of the amount of extension on the bin itself, it holds itself perpendicular.
Yeah, exactly. No, it fits really well. Yeah, there's really only just the two bolts in there.
Amazing. No, it looks beautiful. And I think one of the things you were saying was it's a really quick way to create privacy. You know, it's not going to keep out the invading hordes, but it creates a real sense of privacy in quick order, especially when you get into the summer, because you've got backdrop, you've got the soil, you've got water. So peas can run quickly, beans can run quickly, sunflowers, etc. You can get that herbaceous screen quite quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think with trellising in general, whether it's a wicking bed or not, I think, you know, you put the trellis up early because it tells the plants they have some work to do. I really love that, you know, get it up right off the bat, just when you're planting your little seedlings, because they wake up and they know that they got to get up there.
Awesome. You know, Tayler, this has been great. I've loved learning about the way that you guys have modeled a different way of doing wicking beds, using materials that you have, and really adapting those materials to the conditions that you have. Been diving a little bit more into Christopher Alexander's work, and he's got this wonderful thing about how context and form, and that the form of what we create has to be birthed through the context. And this is a great example of that. The materials, what's necessary, increasing the reservoir. So the big difference between what you've done in Jeremy is Jeremy has that 7 mil gravel to help wick the material up, but it also takes a lot of volume. So now we've missed out on that volume, whereas in your situation, you have that almost complete volume. You've got some structure with the melt crates, and then you have some small true wicks that are wicking up on the side and giving enough to the soil in a wetting pattern that will come out in that 3-dimensional format and then give the soil what it needs. So, you know, it's a real brilliant innovation to show people. And I really want to say thank you for taking the time to show it.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate the opportunity. And I mean, it's, there's lots of hybrids. That's the one thing that I would love to just make sure people understand is that this is one way. You know, the next time I do it is going to be different. I love the idea of the aggregate as the wick, and I'd love to see about playing with that either between the crates and the bin or as the wick in the tube. That sort of intrigues me. So, you know, we won't stop playing around, and I don't encourage anyone to stop trying new things because, yeah, I mean, there's just so many iterations that can be tried. And yeah, this is by definitely not the be all end all, but it's worked pretty well for us, and yeah, it was worth sharing.
It sounds like we're going to have to schedule this for July 3rd, 2019 and check in on all the innovations in a year's time.
That sounds good to me.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to tell folks, or where they can find out more about you and Solera and Tim and the growing business of hatchet and seed contracting?
Yeah, I mean, you can find us at our website, hatchetandseed.ca. We hope that many of you are from Victoria, because that's our increasingly we try to work. You know, now we live right in Vic West, and that's kind of our neighborhood. So we're really trying to work as local as possible. But anyway, for obviously those of you just sort of interested in wicking beds wherever you are, we're happy to share. But yeah, you'll find us working in Victoria these days, and yeah, our website's hatchetletterNseed.ca, and you can find us just by Googling that if you like as well.
Well, Tayler, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I love seeing that work, and it's great to see the innovation that you guys are working with. And again, folks, check out Hatchet, the letter N, seed.ca. Take a look at their work. It's a stunning look at how edible landscapes can be beautiful, functional, can really increase the space, increase the hosting, increase the aesthetics and the feel of a space. And I want to give thanks to Solera for giving you up for an hour. I appreciate that as well, and looking forward to seeing you at the wedding in September.
All right, Javan, I appreciate the work you do. These are awesome. I'm always staying tuned for the next one. So yeah, really appreciate it, and you keep it up as well.
Oh, thanks, mate. For everybody who's watching, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment if you enjoyed this. That's always great. If you want to comment and ask Tayler a question, do that as well. Feel free to share the video far and wide. These are the type of solutions we need. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, be fruitful and multiply.